Hi, glad you've come back and joined us for the discussion on the missional church and its focus on growing the kingdom of God by transforming lives and transforming communities. Transformation occurs when we equip the people in our congregations to reach out to those in need in the community and around the world. One of the great experiences we had last year was in October in our Change the World Mission Day. More than 15,000 people from our congregations went out into the community to serve. We're planning another Mission Day this coming October, and I hope all of you will engage your congregations. It's a powerful witness when you're in the community serving God. And it's a powerful witness when 15, 20,000 United Methodists are all converging on their community to serve people. Our presenter today is Bill Easom, best-selling author and international church growth consultant. Bill has taught alongside and interviewed the pioneers of the missional church movement. For this lesson, he shares about the missional church from the United Methodist perspective, one that balances discipleship and mission. Basically, it's about being rooted in the gospel message, then sent in the world to live it out. Thank you for coming, and thank you for continuing to work in your ministry to help your congregation move out into the community. May God continue to bless you in your ministry.
When asked to do a short video on the missional church and the Wesleyan tradition, I jumped at the chance for 4 reasons. 1, the word missional is too often misunderstood and misused. 2, I believe every church is missional, or it isn't a church. 3, I believe a missional church can be institutional and or non-institutional. And 4, I'm a follower of both Jesus and Wesley, and both were missional. Now let me address these 4 reasons I'm doing this video. The missional conversations today are simply all over the map. Everyone seems to be jumping on the bandwagon and can't wait to use the word. The problem is, most of the ways the word's being used are at best lightweight and at their worst incorrect. When the guru that started all of the various missional conversations, Alan Hirsch, first came to the U.S. from Australia, his basic message was that the institutional church isn't effective, much less biblical. His first book, The Shaping of Things to Come, caused quite a stir in the U.S. Although I resonated with much of it, I was left with one haunting thought. What if carried to the conclusion he has no room for the institutional church at all? It wasn't long after that I interviewed Alan. In that interview, he said there simply wasn't room for the institutional church anymore in the West. And he added to that the attractional church. The only room in the kingdom was for the incarnational missional church. However, over the years, Alan has modified his view and now realizes that in this country, the institutional church is not only here to stay, but it can be one of the best allies of the non-institutional, missional, incarnational church. The problem is that many of Alan's followers, on the fringe, haven't kept up with Alan's morphing and are still teaching that the only way to go into the emerging world is with missional communities that have no tie whatsoever to the institutional church. Neither Alan nor I agree with this position. We believe the missional church can be both institutionally or non-institutionally based. It doesn't matter. However, many of the writings on the missional church have opened up a huge can of worms that many subsequent books have exploited. This can of worms, simply put, is this: is there any validity at all to the institutional church? Books by authors like Frank Viola and George Barna have picked up on this can of worms and have basically denied any validity at all to the institutional church. Now, although I agree with much of what's being written today about the missional church, I'm turned off by many of their conclusions. I simply refuse to believe the only valid form of the missional church is the one that abandons all form of the institutional local church in favor of informal missional gatherings throughout the neighborhood that are totally unconnected from the institutional church. On the other hand, I don't believe the purely attractional church that sits and waits for people to find it is a church either. The role of the church isn't to take care of its own, but to equip its own to reach out to the least, the last, and the lost. So the key to understanding the missional church, in whatever form it takes, is to understand that the community in which it is located is more important than the institution. The focus of the missional church is always outward, always focused on growing the kingdom rather than growing the local church, always focused on transforming the individual and society. Unlike the attractional church, the missional church, micro or mega, finds its reason for being in the transformation of the surrounding community and world. Even when caring for its own people, it knows the best way to feed its people is to get them feeding others. It understands its primary mission field is its backyard, not some distant country, although it probably has a world mission. It sweats drops of blood over its city. Its people spend more time ministering to the city than they do doing ministry in the church. Everything the missional church does is focused on those who are not yet part of the kingdom and are not caring and feeding for the institution. The missional church understands one of life's most basic principles. Life is meant to be given away. Keep it to yourself and you wither and die. Pass it on and you blossom and flourish. Attractional churches fail to understand this concept. The church throughout all time has always been a sent church, beginning with Abraham and coming down to God sending his son to us. Being missional means being sent into the community and the world with the message of the gospel, both social and redemptive. As Jesus said, as the Father has sent me, I'm now sending you. Many of the conversations on the missional church compare the missional church with the attractional church. Whereas the missional church is sent out to the world, the attractional church sits and waits for the world to find it. You might say the attractional church's motto is "You all come," whereas the motto of the missional church is "Let's all go." Both Jesus and John Wesley demonstrated this sentness. Neither of them spent their ministry in the temple or church, but on the streets, where the least, the last, and the lost were found. Neither did they spend the bulk of their time in the office or with the religious leaders. Instead, God sent them to where the people in need were. I just finished a book with my partner, Bill Tinney-Britton. The original title was Staffing the Missional Church. However, the more research we did, the more we came to the conclusion that every effective church is missional. So we changed the title to Staffing the Effective Church, and we titled the first chapter, Every Church is Missional, or It Isn't a Church. To further explain the missional church, we use a comparison between the Jerusalem church and the Antioch church in the book of Acts. The Jerusalem church is a prototype of the purely attractional church. Its primary focus was on taking care of itself and keeping the law. It was focused mostly, if not totally, inward. Even when the persecution came, the apostles stayed in Jerusalem rather than taking the gospel to the world. The Antioch church, on the other hand, is the prototype of the missional church. It sent people out into the world to plant churches, spread the gospel, and grow the kingdom. Its focus was outward, and the Antioch church flourished, while the Jerusalem church had to be subsidized by other churches. I hope you're getting the picture. One of the classic day books on the missional church is The Missional Renaissance by Reggie McNeil. Not long after the book was published, I did an interview with Reggie. In that interview, Reggie likens our time to the confluence of ideas that bombarded the Renaissance. Changes today, he said, are so pronounced that 50 years from now we won't be able to recognize the church. He went on to say that means we have to have a whole new way of measuring biblical fruitfulness. Because we get what we measure, we need a new scorecard that changes everything that we measure. The new scorecard is focused on the personal growth of the person more than the growth of the church. Instead of participation in church ministry, the focus is on the maturation of the person. Instead of measuring how many people are in church, the measure is on what people do when they leave the institutional church. When I asked Reggie how one goes about turning an attractional church into a missional church, his answer was right on. Let me paraphrase it for you. The pastor has to live missional before the people and infect those around him or her with the missional virus until it becomes a contagion. Being missional means, like Jesus and Wesley, pastors have to spend more time in the community than with non-believers than they spend with their church members. Being missional means we commission people to be backyard missionaries rather than to fill offices in the church. Being missional means our people do more ministry in the community than they do programs in the church. Being missional means our focus is on go rather than come. Being missional means we abandon mission, evangelism, and social justice committees in favor of sending the entire church out into the world to transform it and create a new world. Jason Dukes recently wrote a book titled Live Sent, in which he uses the metaphor of the post office rather than a fueling station when referring to the church. By that he means that Christians are God-sent people who don't go to church, but rather are like letters from God. Their lives are sent on behalf of others. They don't sit in the post office gathering dust with other letters. Instead, they are sent into the world to live the message of Jesus. That's the missional church. So here are some ways to measure whether or not your church is missional. Ask yourself these questions. What is God doing in our neighborhood, city, and world that we are a part of? How many adult baptisms are we having each week? How many contacts with people outside the church are we having each week? What difference is our church making in the community? Would our church be missed by the community if we were not here tomorrow? How often do we disciple new converts into leaders? How many new worship centers have we established? When was the last time our church blessed our city? How many people are we sending out into the marketplace to live like Christ? How you answer these questions will determine whether you're an attractional church or a missional church. No matter what your view is of the missional church, one thing remains crystal clear. The world is changing fast, and so are the various forms of the church. Whereas I believe the institutional church is here to stay in the West, I also believe that the form of the church is morphing into something many of us are still trying to comprehend. The future will present us with many new and compelling ways to share the good news. So we will be smart to pay attention.